Dear learners and listeners, welcome to Indira Gandhi National Open University. Today we are going to see the topic global warming and climate change. We have already seen the introduction and the causes for the climate change. This topic is part of the course BGP 003 Conflict and Peace Management. Welcome to this session. I am Dr. G. Uma, working as a faculty in the School of Gender and Development Studies, Indira Gandhi National Open University. In this session, we will see the various conventions related to global warming. These conventions and conferences are organized by the United Nations to address the climate change. First, let us start the climate change conventions in the year 1992. Let us start defining what is climate change. According to United Nations, climate change is a change of climate that is attributed to human activity that alters the composition of the global atmosphere and which is in addition to natural climatic variability observed over comparable time period. The Climate Change Convention was aimed at stabilizing the greenhouse gas emissions. The convention laid down general commitments applicable to all state parties. They are divided as annexed and non-annexed countries. They are to limit greenhouse gas emissions, gather relevant information, develop plans to mitigate and adapt to climate change, and cooperate in research and development. Under the convention, the state parties divided into two categories, annexed and non-annexed, are subdivided into Annex 1 consisting of industrial states, OECD states and economies in transition, and Annex 2 states consisting of only OECD states. Next one, while the former have specific commitments to bring down their greenhouse gas to 1990 levels, the latter also have to bring down the greenhouse gas emissions but are not bound by the baseline limit of 1990 and can be voluntarily fixed them. The beginning of the international cooperation on climate change dates back to the Stockholm Conference in 1972. In the year 1979, the first World Climate Conference in Geneva expressed concerns about the atmospheric conditions. Though this conference saw the participation by the scientists from all around the world, it drew little attention from the policy makers. A few months later, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was jointly established by World Meteorological Organization and United Nations Environmental Programme. The IPCC has been reporting ever since the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that is called IPCC, has been reporting ever since on the climate change issues and coming up with new recommendations in order to counter the negative effects. In the year 1980s, a series of meetings were held in Austria to consider the fixing up the limits for gas emissions. In 1985, an international group of scientists highlighted the impending dangers of the climate change. Growing public awareness and pressure and implications of the Brundtland Commission brought the issue to the forefront of many governments. In the year 1988, Toronto Conference on the Changing Atmosphere, a recommendation emerged calling on the developed countries to reduce carbon dioxide level by 20% by the year 2005. It is a scientific body without any political orientation, and its main objective is to assess the different aspects of climate change and make them available to the public and policy makers. Though initially It was taken as the most authentic source of climate change information. The IPCC was marred by controversies, necessitating the establishment of a panel of scientists and experts to review its contents. First, let us start understanding Kyoto Protocol and other meetings. During the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, that is UNFCCC, International Environment Treaty was finalized by the participating nations for reducing greenhouse gases in 1997 in Kyoto, Japan. This is famously known as Kyoto Protocol. Around 187 countries had signed and ratified the protocol. The protocol had three main objectives. That is, there needs to be commitment to reduce the greenhouse gases on the part of Annexure 1 countries, and these are legally binding on them. Other member countries also need to reduce the greenhouse gases with realistic targets. An array of flexible market-based approaches is to be included to reduce emissions. It was also suggested that active participation of various developing countries and an adaptation fund for climate change are needed for expediting the process. As the Kyoto meeting came to an end, the parties to UNFCCC agreed to bind forces of global marketplace to reduce greenhouse gases emissions. That reflected the first two of the objectives and also proposed to stabilize emissions at 1990 level by 2008 to 2012 and reduce the net emissions of all greenhouse gases below 1990 levels by 2013 to 2018 and work further reduction in the coming years. It was decided that the committee would be established to oversee the commitment and compliance to the protocol. A few interesting facts regarding the compliance of the members and their efforts to reduce emission is given below. Just let us see. Around 38 countries were included in the agreement, that is Annex 1 parties. 37 countries agreed to reduce the emissions. Iceland, Australia and Norway were allowed to increase their emission levels. The United States has signed the protocol but has neither ratified nor withdrew from the treaty. It has insisted that even the developing countries must be taken on board to reduce emissions through binding obligations. China ratified the protocol but was not required to reduce or limit its emissions. China has become the biggest emitter of carbon dioxide in the world by 2008 and surpassed the US. China's power plants operate mostly on the coal and therefore its emission levels are quite high. But its per capita emission is still low, almost 1/4 of that of the United States. India signed and ratified the protocol and India is exempted from the framework of the treaty. The European Union countries have been steadfast in their commitment to reduce emissions and can be termed as the most compliant nations. They had unilaterally agreed to reduce emissions by 20% by the year 2020. Denmark committed to reducing its emissions by 21%. Germany reduced its emission by 22.4% during 1990 to 2008. France has low carbon emissions as it has shut down its coal mines and 80% of its power is generated from nuclear power plants. The United Kingdom was successful in reducing overall emissions levels and has introduced a mandatory law to reduce emissions by 32% in the year 2020 and 60% by 2050. It aims at 80% reduction in emissions. In 2002, the European Union countries introduced quota for 6 important industries, that is steel, glass, cement, paper, bricks and energy, and fines for non-commitment. By 2008, the European Union has achieved 4.7% reduction below 1990 level against 8% as agreed in the Kyoto Protocol by 2012. Next is the Copenhagen Summit. This summit was held in the year 2009. The Copenhagen Summit meeting of 2009 proposed to take forward the Kyoto Protocol and beyond the target year of 2012 and come out with binding legal agreement. Prior to this summit meeting, several meetings have been held regarding the negotiations. In Bonn, in the year 2009 meeting, it was decided that an appropriate level of 25 to 40% reduction below 1990 level would be set as target. In the Bangkok, in the year 2009 meeting, the Barcelona meeting was held in the month of November. In the same year, the meeting was held in the month of September in Bangkok. Changes were proposed in absolute carbon emissions between 1990 and 2020. The summit meeting turned out to be a major disappointment, with nations announcing emission reduction levels in far less percentages than desired. For example, European Union EU agreed on 20% reduction level as against the desired 25 to 40%, while the developing nations felt that the burden was shifted on them to reduce emissions. The developed nations felt that the developing countries too should take responsibility, considering the fact that climate change affects one and all equally. Next is the Doha meet in the year 2012. Doha meet of 2012 focused on 5 aspects of climate change that are given below. Adaptation, that is social and other changes to successfully adapt to climate change. Finance, how countries will finance adaptation to and mitigation of climate change, whether from public or private sources. Next one is the mitigation, steps and actions that the countries of the world can take to mitigate the effects of climate change. Technology. The technologies that are needed to adapt or mitigate climate change and ways in which developed countries can support developing countries in adopting them. Loss and damage. First articulated at the 2012 conference and in part based on the agreement that was signed at the 2010 United Nations Climate Conference in Cancun. It introduces the principles that countries vulnerable to the effects of climate change may be financially compensated in future by countries that fail to curb their carbon emissions. The conference produced a package of documents collectively titled as Doha Climate Gateway. An 8-year extension of the Kyoto Protocol until 2020 limited scope to only 15% of the global carbon dioxide emissions. The conference produced a package of documents collectively titled the Doha Climate Gateway over objections from Russia and other countries at the session. An 8-year extension of the Kyoto Protocol until 2020 limited in scope to and only 50% of the global carbon dioxide emissions due to the lack of participation of Canada, Japan, Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, New Zealand and United States. The conference did not make progress towards the issue of Green Climate Fund. Then we need to see the impact on human health. What type of impact it has created on human health? due to climate change. First is that the basic concerns is about the human health, wherein the weather patterns trigger extremities like droughts and floods. Natural disasters worldwide have resulted in large number of deaths, about 95% of them in poor countries. Public health depends on the availability of clean and safe drinking water, food, shelter, and good social conditions. During floods, there is a scarcity of fresh water supply that results in harmful side effects leading to waterborne diseases. Water is contaminated and often mixes up with sewage water due to breakage in pipelines. This also gives rise to infectious diseases. Next is during drought, food production is seriously affected. There is vulnerability through increase in pest, plant and animal diseases. The reduction in food production leads to malnutrition or starvation with long-term consequences, especially among women and children. Climate change triggers displacement and mitigation of people from one region to another, leading to conflicts, facing problems as environmental victims and refugees, and further health issues due to non-acclimatization of weather conditions. Climate change leads to one of the most vulnerable diseases such as vector species like mosquitoes that spread a disease like malaria and filariasis, dengue and serious infections. Malaria transmission is especially very rampant due to climate change. A heavy rain can cause increase in mosquito population leading to epidemics. Next important impact due to climate change is heat waves. Heat waves claims large number of deaths due to heat strokes, respiratory disease and dehydration. The elderly and children are most vulnerable to these conditions. Next is tuberculosis. Tuberculosis kills approximately 2 million people every year. It is infectious and spreads through air. With polluted air, human lungs became vulnerable to airborne infections, resulting weakening immunity system and weight loss. Globally, there have been uncertain climate conditions resulting in extreme droughts, floods, and temperature rise. El Nino winds affect weather worldwide. It creates floods, droughts, and triggers epidemics. Motor vehicle exhaust, industrial fumes, exposure to hazardous chemicals at workplace, and improper ventilation at home lead to serious health issues. Next important issue with related to climate change for human health or as well as other issues is the environmental deterioration. This environmental deterioration has a serious role in causing socio-economic disruption. The transmission of infectious disease takes a heavy toll on the public health and poses a major risk. The increase of chlorofluorocarbons in the atmosphere increases the risk of ultraviolet radiation, affecting the immune system and leading even to cancers. It causes skin cancer, leprosy, ringworms, and ocular lesions. Increase in bushfires releases large quantities of harmful chemicals, leading to respiratory problems and degrading water bodies. The effects of acid rain include pollution of soil and deposition of acids in the soil, vegetation and water reservoirs. The food grown thereof becomes unfit for human consumption. A significant concern of climate change is the disappearing ice caps and water sources, livestock and agriculture. Coastal zones are largely affected due to this. Coral reefs are damaged by warming, excess waste and overfishing and fungal and bacterial diseases. Reefs provide safety against storms and water salinization and protect fish, which are a major source of food and protein. Adverse climate change leads to loss of biodiversity and habitat, ozone depletion, degradation of air, water and soil. An imbalance is likely to aggravate the situation with irreversible losses to humankind. How to mitigate global warming in India. India needs to opt for cleaner energy sources or make use of the energy sources that can alternatively produce better results. Instead of depending on building new power plants based on coal, it can harness other available sources such as solar energy, wind energy, hydro energy, etc. Hydro energy is the crucial source of energy, and India's Indus and Brahmaputra basins offer major scope for harnessing the hydro energy. India needs to tap this source as the present hydro energy accounts for only 10% of total electricity generation. In many European countries, wind energy has become a major source of generation of energy. The Netherlands leads in harnessing this energy. India too needs to identify the regions from where it can generate this energy. Wind energy is clean and cost effective. Nuclear energy is the new area where India is exploring all the possibilities, and its deal with the United States is an effort in this direction. Nuclear energy does not emit carbon dioxide, and India's target is to achieve 25% of its power requirements from these plants by 2050. Presently, the nuclear plants account for only 2.5% of electricity generation in India. Solar energy, the richest sources of renewable energy, is the need of the hour in India. India can harness best out of this energy, but with the new innovations and technology that can be cost effective, the Government of India has been encouraging the generation from this source so as to encourage new resource and development. Most importantly, there should be sustainable consumption in India. The unhealthy industrial effluence and smog will be more dangerous. The use of plastic is to be limited thoroughly so as to provide for better environment. Himachal Pradesh is the first state in the country to regulate the manufacturing and use of plastic. It has imposed a ban on all types of polythene use. One of the most important things India needs to do is to control air pollution in order to breathe easy and clean air. 60% of air pollution in Delhi is due to vehicular emissions. Two most important requirements are the setting of fuel efficiency standards and improvement of public transport system. India should derive benefit from the carbon credit business, wherein the carbon credits are the certificates issued under emission trading norms. These are used in national and international carbon trading. The incentives of credit goes to the companies or countries that emit less carbon. The unit of carbon credit is known as certified emission reduction. India should opt for clean development mechanism, wherein a project of greenhouse gases reduction is supported by the developed country to developing countries. The credit for greenhouse gas reduction goes to the developed country, and the developing country would benefit by getting clean technology and capital. So far you have understood the measures to be taken as far as India is concerned. Global warming and the climate change are not mere local issues that could be solved at the local level. These international issues are affecting one and all and have major health implications for the whole of mankind. It is extremely important to educate people on this issue because it is mostly man-made phenomena and crisis, and it is the human beings who are responsible for undoing the damage, at least partially. Thank you so much for listening this lecture. We will once again meet in some other lecture. Thank you so much for listening patiently. Thank you.